The question today, is the hobby dying? On this show, we have Stephen Atwell, Ralph Renzetti, myself, Steve Brown, and of course, our host, Andy Crawford. And that's coming at you right now.
All right, welcome to this topic-driven show for a discussion on, is the hobby dying? It's been a discussion of much consternation in our hobby. Let's get a positive position on that. Stephen Atwell has some insights, so let's get started with him. Stephen, what's your thought on the current state of the hobby, and is the hobby dying?
I mean, we hear that the hobby's dying all the time, and it's interesting that all of the stats and whatnot that get thrown out about the hobby dying are coming from other industries inside the hobby that are dying, but it's not a reflection on the hobby as a whole. We continue to hear the hobby is dying from print magazine. We continue to hear the hobby is dying from local hobby shops. And that's not a true representation of the hobby. It's a whole cause correlation thing. Just because a local hobby shop or brick and mortars are disappearing, that's not just our hobby that those are disappearing. It's an old system that hasn't adapted to a modern market.
Well, that's easy to justify. I mean, when a magazine, when some of the magazines in the trade presses say our hobby's dying because their business model is dying, magazines across every industry are dying. That's a dead tree publication problem. I would grant you that. And even with some of the organization, and even to the same extent with brick and mortar. Brick and mortar's dying in every industry. It may not be a reflection of ours as well.
Print magazine, people just don't consume print magazine anymore. There's so many easier, quicker ways to stay up with current trends and modern, whatever's happening in our hobby at the time. There are way easier ways. The internet's available. It's easy to put a group of these guys together to talk about topics. Then, especially with turnaround time on any sort of print thing, like you could submit an article to, let's say, one of the large model railroading publications. That's great, and it covers something that is currently happening, and we may see it in 4 to 6 months, or you and I could sit down and have a conversation about it, and we could put it on YouTube tomorrow.
Right.
So we continue to hear the hobby's dying, or numbers are decreasing and how many people are in the hobby, and that's just not the case. We don't see young people at hobby shows because young people think there's better use of their time than spending 9 hours on a Saturday digging through boxes and hoping to find something, when they could go online and find exactly what they want in 15 minutes and then go do something else with another 8 hours and 45 minutes.
Copy that.
I think one of the reasons why people say it's dying is because they're getting their stats from the wrong place. NMRA did a survey, and basically they surveyed their own members. And I don't know what the age range is in their membership, but I'm sure it's probably 60 and over. And according to them, the average age of the railroad modeler now is, I think they said 68 68. And yet MRH, they did a survey of their membership, which basically is a magazine that's open to everybody. And that it brought it down to, I think it was around 54. That's considerable.
Yeah.
With those stats, what's dying is the older guys.
Yeah, and you look at MRH. A lot of MRH is a digital subscription.
Mm-hmm.
So they're reaching out to a younger group. If you reached out to, I think, people who watch this channel and other model railroad related channels online, you would even find out that the age is probably substantially younger than 54.
Right, absolutely.
It's just a different way of taking in media, or different ways to be involved in the hobby with other people without having to join an organization or use an entire weekend to drive 4 hours to go a train show weekend or whatever the case may be. There's other ways to be involved in the hobby now, and there's other ways to connect with these people.
Right.
You know, if I jump in just for a second,
No.
a few weeks, I won't then. Oh, a few weeks ago, we did an episode on our channel where we're asking the same question: is the hobby dying? And it's interesting that from that, I got a number of comments and a number of emails from younger people. By younger, I mean people in their 20s and younger, saying, just getting into the hobby, love the hobby. The hobby's not dying. I'm totally into the hobby. So I think one of the things that Stephen and Ralph are saying that I'm going to have to concur with, I'd love to be a dissenting opinion, to be like the rebel rock star, but I just can't be. It's true. You really need to consider the source of who is crying the sky is falling. If let's just say subscriptions are going down for certain magazines, or membership is going down for certain organizations, and people look at that as an indicator that a hobby is dying, I think, again, I'm gonna have to agree with both of you. You have to consider, well, maybe there's not the same value or demand for what you're offering, but
Exactly.
there's value or demand in other areas. And I've been a part of other hobbies. I was into fighting robots for a while, and some other things, and people. There's always this alarmist, the hobby is dying, and I got into this hobby like for real, not as like a rail fan kind of guy, for real at 53 years old, 52, something like that, and I'm all into it now. I even have a YouTube channel just like you guys do. So I haven't seen anything that indicates the hobby is dying, and it's not the end of the world if it did, frankly. I love the hobby, and I'll always be able to buy something on eBay to run my railroad on, but I don't think we have to panic about the hobby dying. And then if there's some indicators that things in some areas are actually in decline, then maybe those of us who are sold out for the hobby need to ask the question, why, and what can be done about it? And I've got some thoughts on that I want to elaborate on now, but it's just something to consider.
It's interesting. You look at, let's say, a magazine like Model Railroader. I know that one comes up often. It gets brought into discussions of when the hobby is dying, and they say, well, look at Model Railroader. It's not even publishing a full magazine anymore. It's half the size it was 10 years ago. And it's like, well, the half that's missing is a lot of advertising. Train World used to have a 4 or 5 page ad in every single Model Railroader, and it's now single page, one side.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that, you can't even justify saying, oh, even the magazines are getting smaller. No one's even willing to advertise anymore. And it's like, those same companies are still advertising. Midwest Model Railroad used to advertise in Model Railroader. We no longer do. The return on investment in Model Railroad magazine is no longer worth what it was years ago. We use Google because Google reaches more people quickly. It is just as targeted as a trade magazine. And it's, in fact, more targeted. We can set up advertising campaigns to target somebody who is searching for one specific item if we wanted to. Oh, they've searched for this one item. And so even like ad revenue that is funding the Model Railroader magazine, any of the hobby magazines, really, as the ad revenue disappears and goes to other forms, and mostly online forms, even saying, oh, the magazines are getting smaller and smaller is not an indication that the hobby is dying. It's still just the same indication that people are consuming via other methods.
Yeah, I think what's actually happening, they're, like you said, they're consuming differently. Manufacturers are manufacturing differently. They used to mass produce. Big companies used to have these stockpiles on shelves, and nowadays it's basically produced to order.
JIT, just in time production to some degree. That's definitely a big deal in the printing industry as well. And I hate to be the dissenting force in this. I do think that the expression of "is the hobby dying" is a bit hyperbolic. It makes interesting headlines. I don't think it's a practical way to think about a slowing or ascendancy in the hobby either way. I've tried to look for some, we've had these discussions many, many times in the community, and I've read much of this, and I tried to look for some information outside of the hobby because we're going to be biased from inside. And I found some information 2016 article in the Washington Post that was pretty interesting. Actually, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal had an interesting discussion where they had talked to several modelers, including Howard Zaid, with a video of his layout that's definitely worth taking a look at. There's one from 1999 from the Chicago Tribune that had some interesting information. These people don't have insights into the hobby. They have an outside take on it. My concern about the numbers is I think it's undeniable that at one time our hobby was much larger than it is today. The highlight, according to what I can understand, was in the early 1970s. That seems logical with the baby boomers, getting toy trains for their kids, for Lionel, etc. There's a natural entry into the hobby that took place then that doesn't take place as much today with trade sets, brick and mortar hobby shops being fairly prevalent throughout the country, etc. I think that thinking it's dying is an extreme hyperbolic concept. I don't think it may ever die, or not anytime in the foreseeable future that anybody, maybe when we're colonizing the moons of Jupiter, it might not be a very prevalent hobby. But the question in my mind is, has it stagnated where it is? Is it still in decline from the 70s, or is it in a slight upward tick? And I'm very optimistic that it could be in an upward tick with some adjustment, but I think the manufacturing base makes it look like it could be in a subtle decline, and with a minor adjustment, I think it could be a boon.
I don't even think the hobby's constricting. I think where the idea that the hobby is constricting, and you touched real base on the 70s, and there was a lot of crap that came out in the 70s. And by crap, I don't mean just like, I mean junk models. There was a lot of just junk that came out. And most of that junk, the Tyco type stuff and the early, or like the Bachmann back then, was junk. It was never it wasn't a really drive into the hobby. I would if you're into model cars, you don't consider Matchbox model cars.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I view the Tyco and the sets that I got as a child. It's the Hot Wheels version of a model car. It's a very cheap, low entry to bear. Do I like this hobby? And if so, I may actually follow into the hobby. So I think when we're talking about stuff in the 70s as that was the boom time for model railroading, I don't think it really was. I think that was the shotgun approach of just get crap out to everyone. And a lot of sets were sold then, but a lot of those people disappeared.
But it was an entry point.
What's up, Ralph?
The fortunate part of that, the dynamic you just described, it still happens. You still have the starter sets. The difference is the manufacturers have actually made the locomotives work better.
Yeah, the Bachmann starter sets that we sell now, everything in those sets is quality.
Yeah.
I mean, I may not be a big fan of the Bachmann Easy Track, but the stuff is quality. It's not junk anymore. The Kato starter sets are not only Kato starter sets are really nice stuff, and the Kato Unitrack looks great. And people build entire layouts out of the Kato stuff, and the sets are more tailored to actually getting and staying with the hobby than getting it and being oh well. Eh.
And it's more about, I think, my instinct about why people think the 70s was such a time, and you'd probably have to divide the hobby into the entry point of the people who had a circle of track on a piece of plywood because they got effectively a toy train set from Tyco or Lifelike, versus the guys that become serious. I think the guys that started out with a Tyco train set first, that just become an entry point of the hobby. And that entry point I think the barrier to entry to the hobby is slightly increased today that would naturally constrict it a bit. There is an argument to be made that constriction happened in the 80s and 90s, and now it's stable, if not growing or declining from that point. So I agree that the point that going back to the 70s to look at numbers is probably futile to do. But there are some numbers that make some sense from back there, especially when it comes to manufacturing numbers. How many units were purchased? How many units Chinese manufacturing made of locomotives of, say, Athearn Blue Box, the standard of its day, versus, the equivalent standard of its day today, or the same with freight cars. And I think to some degree, some of those manufacturing numbers have went down. That could be due to layout size. There's a lot of reasons to explain these numbers. And sadly, none of these companies that I could find are publicly traded in a way that we could see financials.
Yeah. Ralph looks like it's about first.
I was going to just jump in real quick. We're talking about like starter train sets. Again, late entry into actually getting into the hobby. My first train set, Mr. Atwell, was actually a Bachmann that came with a big boy locomotive when I didn't even know what a big boy locomotive was. It had the easy track snapped together. It was DC, baby, with a little rheostat throttle. I hooked that oval up on my my desk at work and just watched that train run round and round. I was like, totally, I got hooked. I don't have any of those. I have the cars. I don't have the rest of it. But if I could just jump in off topic for just a second to give 5 points to Stephen Atwell for the first use of the word crap on this show. Loving it. If he could grow a mohawk, he would be almost as cool as I. Hey, let me just throw something else out there, and hopefully I'm not deviating too far from what we're talking about. But I was at a model railroad or a hobby store today, and just checking out what they had in model railroad stuff. And for me to spend $100 on 2 crossing guard signals with LEDs on them, or $50 for a freight car. I saw one advertised in a very popular model railroad magazine for like 50 something bucks for a freight car. And I just thought to myself, if you want to see the younger people in the hobby, very few of them are going to have $50 for one freight car. I don't want to spend $50 for a freight car. I love model railroading. I love trains. I don't love it $50 worth. It's hard for me to spend $250 on a freaking locomotive. So if we're talking about why using young people as an indicator to get in, we have to compete with a video game being $49.95, and they can play that forever, or a drone being a couple $100 and you buy one, or maybe $1,000 and you buy one, or model railroading where you can't even get a fleet going for under $1,000. It is very tough. You have to stick to DC, and all the cool people are doing DCC. It's very tough. But just while I'm on my little rant, baby, the manufacturers of this stuff, I don't believe will allow the hobby to die, because that means Walthers is dead. Woodland Scenics is dead. Well, maybe not Woodland Scenics, because they do all kinds of crap. Athern's dead. Atlas is dead. They have to figure out a way to support the hobby anyway, because that's their livelihood. So, again, personally, I'm not worried about the hobby dying. I'm just worried about am I going to lose my house because I want to put a second deck on my model railroad? That's my concern, especially since, I'm unemployed right now, but that's a sidebar.
But I have some question and challenge in my mind as to stagnation, etc. I think there's an extreme opportunity for growth in many of the young people that I hire working in the IT industry. I hire a lot of these young 20-somethings that are interested in technology, obviously, that love the technology. Our hobby interfaces with technology in so many ways these days, not just how we gather the information and the reason that these magazines and other organizations are reporting some bad numbers, but with DCC and computer integration and social networking, these things that we do in our communities that we do, it's very, very, very technology friendly. Look at how many people are running trades with their phones. I am extremely optimistic about the opportunity in our hobby for a massive amount of growth that I think would be unparalleled in any era prior to, if we were capitalizing on it correctly. But I do think some adjustment might possibly need to be made in the approach we take. And that's as positive a spin as I could put on that for a moment. And we would like to return back to this topic on the next installment. If you guys would look for some of our next topic shows that are coming up, and then we'll return to this at a future date in a future video segment.
Okay.
Well, hope you enjoyed this first segment. Is the hobby dying? We've got 3 segments on this one. It turned out to be kind of a hot topic. So these shows are only 20 minutes long, so that's the reason why we made 3 segments out of this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Please comment at the bottom what you thought about it. If you have any other topics you'd like to discuss, put those in the comments. If you want to volunteer to be on the panel as a panelist, we'll be glad to have you. You can put that in the comments or either email Bill Graham or myself, Johnny Reb. You'll find our email addresses at YouTube Mall Builders. This series of shows will be on YouTube in the playlist under Mall Railroading Views, so you'll be able to go back and watch it again, along with all the other shows that we have in playlists there. So, hope you enjoyed it. Have a good weekend. And we'll see you at the next series, which will be next Friday. Thank you.